Okay, so there should be a recording of this meeting that I will put on the e-learning site, and I'll also put it on the YouTube link. How many people are here? Shall we just start? 40 people. I think it's a good start. I'm not quite sure how many people are going to attend. You guys all seem a bit exhausted. However, I think I just want to reiterate to you, but I'm preaching to the converted here, that if you attend these pracs and get guidance now, then it just makes your lives easier in the long run, and it means you do the pracs more quickly and more easily. So it really is worth putting the time in and the data in to attend these pracs and these tuts, because then it just makes everything smoother. So, as I reiterated in the email that I sent to you, all of you on Monday, we're reaching the final stage of this course. There's a couple more lectures this week, after which the lectures end, and you guys are expected to be revising and consolidating. This prac is a prac to help you write a discussion and to talk to you about exactly what's expected of the final report. And the final report is due on the 12th of June. So we're going to focus mostly on the final report today. On Friday, we're going to have a final Q&A where you have a bit of a chat about how the course went. And we're also going to explain to you exactly what the other assessment is going to be. It's basically a form of assessment that isn't exactly an exam, because it's not formally an exam, as you might have heard from the university, but it's going to be assessing your integration and knowledge of all the lecture material of the last 6 weeks. So that's really going to be your guys' priority, is to get up to scratch with the lectures, because you won't be able to succeed in that assessment if you guys haven't read or listened to or somehow engaged with the lecture material. Before I start the prac and talk about the prac for today, does anyone have any comments or any questions?
Hi, Sally. I don't know if you can hear me.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Hi,
Yeah.
it's Layla.
Yeah.
So those quizzes that we do after each lecture, is there a due date for them?
Yes, as I said to you in the email that I sent out yesterday, to encourage you guys to finish these quizzes and to engage with the lecture material, I'm going to start closing those quizzes. I'm going to close all the soils quizzes by Friday. So if you haven't done it by Friday, then you can't complete the quizzes. It's really easy marks, guys. Everyone gets 100 for it. So it's just an easy way to up the marks. Then I'm going to close the biogeochem quiz by next week, Wednesday. And I'll close the biodiversity quizzes by the following Monday. I think I put. So basically, I'm just putting a bit of pressure on you guys to engage with the lecture material, because so far you've just been prioritizing other things. That's the feedback I got from you at the last feedback session, which is that the pracs have been keeping you so busy that you haven't engaged with the lectures. But somehow we've got to just balance our priorities. So okay. Does that answer your question, Layla?
Yes, it does. Thanks. And how much do these quizzes count? Because I don't remember seeing them on the outline that you maybe you haven't.
Let me pull it up. I think all of those quizzes together count about 3%, so the same as one prac.
Oh, perfect.
Let me just double check I'm giving you the right information though. Mark allocation. So your pracs count about 3%, and all this other things, the quizzes and the field trip attendance together counts another 3%.
Oh, okay, thank you. Just so I can make sure. Perfect.
Okay. And then just in terms of, so all this mark allocation, we basically pulled down the amount that the tests count, and we upped the amount that the prac material and the final report counts. So that's because we think that way you guys will get a more fair indication of your engagement with the course. Okay, good. Any more questions, guys? Field trip attendance. Do you remember where you guys would know, like, if you attended the field trip, then you get a point. If you didn't attend the field trip, you don't get a point. But I mean, it counts like 0.5% or something. So the field trip was compulsory, as you guys remember. I think nearly all of you attended. No, you don't get 3% to attend. The quizzes plus the field trip attendance plus whether you handed in your data most of you handed in your data. All of that together counts 3%. It's basically just it's a class participation mark. Great. Okay, any more questions? In that case, I'm going to head on to the Prac for today. You guys will all have handed in your Prac 12 yesterday, I hope, or those of you who've got extensions will be trying to get it done. So Prac 11 was around teaching you how to present results and how to write up an aims and objective. Prac 12 was to teach you how to start writing and telling a story and justifying your research and learning how to write an introduction. So the Prac today is to help you put it all together into a research report. And the final part of a research report is the discussion and the abstract. So today I'm going to be answering all your questions about what's expected in terms of the research report, but I'm also going to be teaching you how to write a discussion and how to write an abstract. So I'm going to share my screen at this point, and we're going to go straight to the Prac. The Prac is on the e-learning site under Practical 13. And the objectives of this practical is to help you finish your scientific report and develop a discussion section and write an abstract. Now, some of your TAs will already have directed you to this very useful document, which is also on the e-learning site, which is called How to Write a Report in the Format of a Scientific Paper. And this document has been prepared by APES academics over the years, and it really gives you everything you need to know about the structure and the formatting and the content. So any questions that you have, like, should I have a title? How should the title look? What font should I be using? How should the references look? All of those questions will be answered in this one document. So I'm actually going to show you guys how to find the document. If you're in the APES2036 on the e-learning site, you go to resources and you go to Pracs. And then under Prac 13 is this very useful and helpful document, How to Write a Report in the Format of a Scientific Paper. Now, some of you will have done this for other courses, so you don't really need the background. And for others of you, this is the first time you've ever written a scientific paper. So that's why it's hard for us to know where to kind of place, or like how much detail to go into in the actual Prac. So I'll try balance it a little bit. I just want to introduce you to this document. If you open up this document, it gives you, and basically the way the document is laid out is an example of the formatting. It's nice in this report to have a title page. So here's the title page, and that would be the title of your report. And then there'd be you would be the author of the report and what your affiliation is. So this document, which is teaching you how to write a scientific report, also is an example of the formatting of a scientific report. So a scientific report always has an abstract at the beginning, and an abstract is a summary, a nice little summary. You can see this abstract is only 6 lines, a very short summary of the entirety of the report. And because it's a summary, we usually write it at the end. So I'm going to explain to you how to write the abstract at the very end. We also like to have keywords. In your example, your keywords could be trees, grasses, twine crater, savanna function, soil properties, whatever keywords you think link to. And usually I just take the keywords out of the abstract and out of the title. And then you go into the meat of the report. You're going to have an introduction. In this document, it tells you the format, tells you you should be double spaced. You should preferably use Times New Roman or some other nice simple font. Can I get some feedback from you guys? Would you like me to go through in detail all this information about how to write a scientific report? I'm going to get a vote. I'm going to ask everyone to vote just via the chat room about whether you want me to go into the detail at this point or whether you want to read it up in your own time. You can talk or you can type.
Hi, sorry, Sally. What were the options to either go through everything in detail now or?
So this document is available on the e-learning site. It tells you everything you need to know about how to write a scientific report, what the formatting should be, what headings you need to have. It tells you how to do references. So I can scroll through this and talk through the important points with you now. Or if you guys feel like you already know, then I can move on to just kind of the key issues on how to write a discussion. I'm very happy to go through the detail of like who should you be, but I'm aware that some people have data issues, so that's why I'm giving you guys the options. Okay, some people want detail, some people want their own time, some people want a brief summary. So I think as a good compromise, I'm going to scroll through the whole document and highlight the important bits. Sorry? Could you say that again? Okay. Okay, those of you who are talking to each other, maybe can you mute your microphones? And because some people have expressed a summary, I'm just going to scroll through this in detail, just showing you where to find the information you need. So as I've mentioned, this report shows you the structure, how you need to have a title page, how the abstract and keywords come first. Then you go into the introduction. Here in this report, it talks to you about your writing style, about how you need to be clear and how you need to be organized. I'm hoping the TAs will have explained to you in their feedback to Prac 12 what's missing in terms of that and how you can improve and be concise and clear and organized. You have to remember who you're talking to. You're talking to a scientific audience, so you need to be quite proper in terms of how you talk. And there's a whole big discussion about this, active versus passive voice. You can say, we went to the field and we collected some data. It makes it a lot easier to write and a lot easier to read. Pages should have margins. The text should be at least 11-point font, and you need to use double spacing. So if you copy the format of this, then you'll do fine. It's really helpful to have page numbers. Scientific reports use 2 levels of headings. So the main headings are the main things, the abstract, the introduction, the results, the methods, the discussion. And then within the introduction, if you want to have subheadings, for example, if your work is around soils affecting vegetation and vegetation affecting herbivory, you could have 2 subheadings if you would like to, but it's not prescribed. I think you guys have all been hammered in how to do scientific names, but I'm going to point out to you that it needs to be capital letter for the genus, lower letter for the species, and italics. You're going to lose marks if you don't do it correctly. There we go. Here's some common mistakes you guys can go through. And then, as we mentioned, the report structure has to include all of these components. So we've already worked on the introduction, the materials, the methods, and the results. You guys need to fill in all these other little bits, and that's what I'll be teaching you about today. It tells you information about the title page, the abstract. And then we've already talked about the introduction. So if you just want feedback or just a revision, you can go in there about how to do an introduction. We've already talked about the materials and methods, and by next week you will have got feedback from your TA about how to do the material methods and whether you did a good job or not. Remember, a material methods section always needs a data analysis section, like I compared these. How did you compare them? Did you plot a regression to show whether sand content increases with tree cover, or did you do a bar plot? Remember to do that. And then, so this document is going to give you all information. If you want to know how to do a figure, if you're confused by what the TA told you about the right way to present a figure, go to this document. It'll tell you how to present tables. It'll tell you how to present figures. Figures have captions at the bottom. So you have in the caption, you provide a brief description of the data and all the abbreviations you use. So this document is really useful, especially if you get negative feedback from your TA. Some people have commented and said they don't know why they did badly in Prac 11. If you don't understand, or if your TA can't explain, come have a look. Here it explains to you exactly what we're expecting. Okay. Presenting statistics. We had some discussions around how to calculate the standard deviation and how to present the standard deviation. So when you guys are doing a mean, when you're calculating the mean number of species at a soil pit, then you also need to calculate the standard deviation and you need to report that. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Or just comments about the feedback they received from their Prac 11? Is it all making sense? Question, do we have to put a contents page? No, you don't need to put a contents page. And the reason for that is that a scientific report always has the same structure. So no need for a contents page, but we do need a keywords page. Is there a difference between me saying woody biomass and tree biomass? It depends really what you call a tree. If you were including some of your little shrubs as trees, then woody biomass is maybe more correct, but I wouldn't mark you down for tree biomass. Will the final report mark comprise of the individual marks of Prac? So your individual marks for Prac in 11 and 12 are Prac marks, and then the whole report will be marked as one big mark, and that will count 10%. That was Linda's question. Does everyone understand? So each Prac that has been marked counts 3%, and then the final report counts 10%. So if you did badly in Prac 11, then you can improve and then get more marks for doing it correctly in the final report. Does that answer your question, Linda? Okay, great. Yeah, so we do expect you to demonstrate that you understand that you took an average and that you need to report the average and the standard deviation. Exactly how you do that is up to you. You can do it in a table, you can do it in the text, you can try add a little whisker plot to your graph if your TA showed you how to do that. Okay, so there's the results. If you didn't find a result, and sometimes we don't find a result, that's not a problem. Please report it anyway. Or even if you found results that went against what you were expecting, that's even more exciting for a scientist. As a scientist, you have to learn to be really, really, really excited when you're wrong, because that's the whole point of science, is that you make progress by proving yourself wrong. So if you were expecting to find a huge difference in the amount of grass biomass from the top of the slope to the bottom of the slope, and you found no difference at all, then that's great. Report it. Give us a nice big fat graph showing no difference, because that's still results. Appendices, if you guys wanted to add your entire species list to your report, you could add it, but we're not expecting that. I'm going to talk through the discussion in quite a lot of detail just now, so I'm not going to talk about it now, but this gives you more detail and a different perspective on the discussion section. Finally, you need an acknowledgement section. You need to be able to say who helped you to do this research. So I want you to sit and think, who helped you? Did your mother help you enter the data when you were too busy? Did someone drive you all the way to Tyne Crater when you missed the bus? Tyne Crater should be acknowledged because they offered us a research site. If your friend had a nice old discussion with you and helped you to formalize your aims and objectives, anyone who helped you do this research should be in the acknowledgements section. And then I think your TA has gone through what's needed in terms of references, but I just want to reiterate, references are easy marks. You always get at least 5–10% of your mark is for references. And if you get it right, you get full marks. And if you get it wrong, then you've lost marks for no good reason. So there's been some questions around the correct way to cite references. You can't just put the link to the reference. Say you found this paper and you got the DOI of that. That's not, you can't just put that in. You have to put the details of the paper, who the author were, what the title was, what the journal was, preferably the page numbers. Just in case that link breaks or fails, we need to have the actual information. And here in this document, it gives you an example of exactly how to do the references. This is how you do scientific papers. You want to have the title in normal font and the journal in italics. Everything has to be correct, and then you get easy marks. Don't format your references as a list, just put them in alphabetical order. So any questions you have, come back and refer to this document. You can cite electronic references, but if all of your references are electronic references or websites, you're going to be marked down. You have to show that you've also read what we call the primary scientific literature, the original literature. There's all sorts of different ways, the things that you can reference. And then the final section of this document is around plagiarism. I'm pleased to say that there's actually, so far as we know, from what we've noticed, there's been very little plagiarism on this course. You guys have all put the effort in to do your own work, and we really appreciate that. We want to be marking your work, not your friend's work or your brother's work who did this course 3 years ago. So we're going to ask you to submit a plagiarism form when you submit your final report. I will put this form on the e-learning site, or I haven't yet, but under Prac 13, you're going to find a plagiarism form which you have to sign and say, I know what plagiarism is and I'm not plagiarizing. Anyone who has questions around plagiarism, if people don't know what plagiarism is, because I sometimes have masters and PhD students who don't know what plagiarism is, so there's no shame in that. And especially it's the people who've been in the working world who are just completely outraged when I tell them that plagiarism is when you copy and paste from a website. They say, I do that all the time at work. And then we have to discuss how, in an academic context, it's not acceptable. So anyone who doesn't feel comfortable that they know what plagiarism is, or they feel, then please get in contact with me and we can have a discussion about it. And we can put you in touch with the people who can help you to write in a way that doesn't plagiarize. Any discussions around plagiarism or questions?
Sorry, I'm just checking that our TAs will obviously go through the Turnitin report because our introductions and stuff that we've already submitted is likely to be the same or unchanged, and then Turnitin might register a high plagiarism account because we've already submitted something like that, just so people don't freak out.
That's a very good point. I'm going to investigate the options of the e-learning to site to see if I can exclude those pracs from the Turnitin when it does the analyses. If I can't do that, then each TA will go, and if all the plagiarism is in the introduction, then it won't be counted as plagiarism. Very good point. Let me write a note to myself to remember. Thank you, Leila. What other questions have there been? Where have we got to? Questions. Do we need an over results paragraph, or does I will talk through what's required for the results? Thanks, Leila. Tatenda, woody biomass, tree biomass, bum, bum, bum. I think using the terms interchangeably would be fine in this context, in my opinion, Tatenda. It's kind of like the difference between precipitation and rainfall. Rainfall is one type of precipitation, and you also have snow and frost and all of that stuff. But in our systems, rainfall and precipitation are pretty much equivalent, so you can use them interchangeably. You can acknowledge me if you want, if you think I've been helpful. And definitely, I think all of your TAs will have been helpful, so I think it would be really great to acknowledge them. That was all the questions. Okay, any more questions? Yes, Tatenda, you are expected to use your Pracs 11 and 12 and stitch them together. You're not expected to write a new introduction. So that's why I'm going to check to make sure that the e-learning site doesn't penalize you. Okay. Yes, there was a verbal question. No, yes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I have a question with regards to the method. So if our research paper's aims and objectives is aimed towards something and it's not using a certain set of results, when we write the method, do we include the fact that we did also get results to stuff that doesn't really relate to our aim and objectives?
No, and I'm going to give the TA's feedback on that as well. If you focused only on the species composition and you didn't report any of the biomass data, you don't have to report the methods for collecting the biomass data. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So it's your job to think through. So you're going to get marks if your aims and objectives, if your results link to your aims and objectives and your methods link to your results. So if you can show that you've thought through exactly how to make this a coherent paper, then you will get good marks. So if your methods section have nothing to do with the results you present, and if the results you present have nothing to do with what your aims and objectives were, then you will be marked down. But you won't lose marks if you don't say every single thing that you did. I'm going to confirm that with the TAs.
Thank you.
Great, that was a very good question. Any more questions?
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to know, say for example, if now when we're writing up our final report, what if we have like some ideas or things that we feel we could have used or we could use in our final report that we didn't include in Pracs 11 and Pracs 12, will we be penalized for like putting them in the final report if they weren't there in?
No, you won't. In fact, if you decide you want to chuck your original aims and present a new one in your final report, you won't be marked down. Your final report will be marked on its own. So if you decide to rethink everything and do a new analysis and present new data, that's totally fine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so that document tells you everything you want to know, like just generally about how to format a report. Now I'm just going to go to the Prac 13 that we usually would run together in the lab, where we would engage with you and you would engage with each other around writing a scientific discussion. I'm going to see how easy this is to do in an online environment. So what have we done so far? This is the objectives. I've talked you through this document, how to write a report in the format of a scientific paper, to show you that it exists and that it's a really useful resource. And just in terms of how to present your results, in Prac 11, all we really asked you to do is to submit some graphs. But in a real scientific paper, you have to submit the graphs and then you also have to write up what the graphs show. It doesn't have to be a lot of detail, but you just have to write a little story around your results. So there's different ways to report the results. You can write them in the text, you can present a figure, or you can present a table. But you still need some text describing what is shown in the figure. So a results section, a good results section is really simple, really clear, and really precise. All of the discussion happens in the discussion. So even though your results are really interesting and you have a lot to say about them, in the results section, all you do is you say, I found that there was much higher diversity of trees at the bottom of the slope than at the top of the slope, and that the very lowest diversity of trees was in the middle of the slope, full stop. And then you say, I also found that the largest amount of herbivory was on the trees in the middle of the slope, full stop. And you can refer to the figure. You can refer to your figure 2 or your figure 1 where you show that information. Discussing why that is or whether there's a correlation between those two things, all of that happens in the discussion. In the results, we want you to support the averages or the average trends. We don't want you to support all the detailed information. So I don't want a long list of all the species you found at the bottom of the slope. I want you just to say, on average, there are about 10 species per transect at the bottom of the slope, and the dominant species were fine-leafed species. And then if you want to report an entire list of every single species, put that in the appendix. That's not for the results section. And then also you need to lead the reader through the results in an order that makes sense. So usually what I suggest is that you follow your objectives so that the results get reported on in the same order of your objectives so that it leads through nicely. So that's a tip for writing up results. It shouldn't be too tricky. It's really just a couple of paragraphs, and you can go look at some example papers to see how people have reported results. I gave you 2 example papers for how to write up methods. You can go look at their results sections or any other papers that you have. Does anyone have any questions around what's expected in terms of reporting the results? Okay, so then I'm going to go through to the next section of this Prac, which is how to write a discussion and an abstract. So at this point, we've got results that we're happy with and that test hypotheses that you've set up in the introduction. So now we have to discuss these results and then show whether they prove or disprove your hypotheses. So this involves a completely different set of skills. Writing a good discussion requires logic and communication skills. It's your opportunity to see whether you can make a defensible argument out of your results, which either confirms or refutes your ideas. So you need to be able to tell a good story, and you need to be able to back it up with the evidence that you have prepared. So usually I would get you guys to sit in a group, and each of you takes turns to present your ideas and present your arguments to your friend, and then your friend tells you whether it makes sense. I'm going to suggest that you try to do this online. Like, you guys have been in this course for 6 months, so I assume that all of you, I'm hoping that all of you have the email address and cell phone number of at least one other person in the class. And I'm going to suggest that in the next few days, you guys arrange a little 10-minute online coffee session where you take turns to say, these were my results. And this is why I think they're interesting, and they totally disprove my hypotheses. But now that I've read this paper by Scholes et al. 1993, I understand why I got my results. So just talk through your discussion. That's what I would like you to do. Of course, I can't force you to do it because we're not all in the lab. If we were in the lab, I would force you to do it. So this is my suggestion, is that you sit for 15 minutes with a friend from the class and try to explain it to each other. The other person has to listen attentively, and then they have to make constructive suggestions about how to make the argument more scientifically valid. So there are 3 things you need to ask about a discussion. In a discussion section, you need to ask, do the results presented relate clearly to the questions that your friend posed in the introduction? So is the question and the results linked? And then can your friend explain these results clearly? So you need to be able to explain in words the patterns that you found. And then you need to explain in words what you've concluded from those results. So for the example that I gave, where you've got higher species diversity at the bottom of the slope, you have to say, so I've showed that there's higher clay content at the bottom of the slope, and I've showed that there's higher species diversity at the bottom of the slope. So potentially, clay environments result in more biodiversity. And then you could go back to your biodiversity lectures and say, why would that be? Is clay environment a more stressful environment? You generally find that more stressful, more nutrient-poor environments tend to have higher species diversity. Oh my goodness. So the literature tells you expect higher species diversity in nutrient-poor environments, but my data has shown me that there's higher species diversity in the site with the highest cation exchange capacity. My goodness, this is really fascinating and exciting. Am I wrong, or is the literature wrong? This is what you need to discuss in the discussion. Okay. Does everyone understand that particular example that I gave? In that particular example, the results that were presented, which is higher number of species on the clay site, go against the general theory that people have, which is that high nutrient sites tend to have lower diversity. And that's what you would need to engage with in the discussion. Any questions around that?
What days are you taking?
Or it could be that your results totally fit with what the literature tells you, in which case you have to talk about that. So if you find that there was much higher woody biomass on the sandy site, that's generally what you'd expect from the literature. If you go back to your lecture on water availability and water, then you'll go, there's that Neumeyer paper that I pointed you towards, which is around how water availability and soil texture drive water availability and vegetation. You can go and say, oh, well, my data totally confirm what Neumeyer expected, which is that at the sandy site, it's a higher water environment, which means there's higher woody biomass. That's exciting. So each time you have to say, these were my results. Do they confirm what the literature says, or do they reject what the literature says? And in that case, what do you think about that? So it doesn't matter whether your results agree or disagree with the literature. You just have to tell us whether that's the case or not. Any questions around that? Going to the comments section. Tatenda thinks it's better to get a total stranger from the class and have them evaluate your ideas because they aren't prone to bias. Possibly, but on the other hand, I think you just have to ask your friend to be objective and be constructive. You can be nice and kind to someone as well as giving them constructive feedback. If you guys ever become supervisors or managers in your field, whatever job you get, chances are as you move up the career ladder, you're going to become a manager, and then you're going to have people underneath you, and then you have to guide them when they make mistakes while still being friendly and encouraging. So that's your job when you are engaging with so if your friend comes with a totally ridiculous discussion that makes no sense at all, it's your job to tell them that in the politest, kindest way that you can. Does that answer your question, Tatenda? Very useful skill to learn. The Americans, I have all these American colleagues that tell me about the sandwich technique. The sandwich technique is something Americans use because Americans are incredibly polite and friendly people. And so when they're trying to criticize you, they make a sandwich. They call it a shit sandwich. They tell you something very nice. They say, I really like your handwriting. And then they say, but I'm afraid that that sentence makes absolutely no sense. And then they say at the end, however, oh, let me say, I think of something nice about a sentence that makes absolutely no sense. However, you used some very fancy vocabulary. So you give your honest opinion in the middle of two very nice things to help boost someone's ego. So you must, I always practice that technique now that my American colleagues have taught me about it. Okay, so that was a question around how to go about this peer review session. I really recommend you try do that. And I'm hoping that if you go back to this practical, basically just get your friend to talk to you, check through these 3 points. The other thing that I'm going to suggest that you check is whether your friend has any evidence that they've read any papers that can tell them whether they're right or not. I mean, in a discussion, you can have the most beautifully argued discussion that presents your results and discusses them in great detail based on your ecological knowledge. But unless you refer to the literature and what other people found, you won't get full marks for your discussion. Because the point of a discussion is to take your own work and then contextualize it in terms of what other people have found. Great. Any more questions? I'm going to, until I move on to the tips for how to write a good discussion. That's right, Courtney. Shit sandwich. Tips for writing a good discussion. So in the results, you describe the patterns you found. The discussion interprets those patterns. And I actually use a formula. I mean, when I was in undergrad, I got really cross with my supervisors and my teachers when they told me that I must use a formula, because I was like, oh, but my writing should be free and creative. And I just want to express my creative ideas, and I don't want to be stuck into this structure or this formula. Over the years, I've realized that you can be creative even within the structure of a scientific report. So over the years, I've realized that having a nice, well-structured scientific report doesn't stop you from being a creative scientist. If you think about it, like when you study poetry at school and they taught you about the sonnet, and the sonnet is this like really strict thing of poetry where it has to have so many lines and so many things and everything has to rhyme. But still, the poets who write sonnets make beautiful creative poetry. So that's your job for the scientific report. You have to stick to the structure, but we still expect you to be creative and give us some interesting ideas. So my suggestion of a structure for the discussion, which is what I always use, is I start off saying, this is what I found, but I can say it in a more relaxed way. I can just like talk over, so it's a little brief summary of the results in a very relaxed fashion and how they relate to the questions that you asked in the introduction. And then I summarize that evidence and I interpret it. That's when I go back to each objective and I say, I wanted to know whether cation exchange capacity is correlated with salinity. That was my question. And as you'll see from figure 2, I found that there's absolutely no relationship between cation exchange capacity and salinity. And then you have to say why. Then you have to think, well, that is quite surprising because salinity, you know, sodium is a cation, so I'd expect that cation exchange capacity and salinity would be linked to each other. So this is the hard part. This is where you say what you found and then you say why you think you found it. And in order to do that, you have to compare to other work. You have to say, well, although I was quite surprised by that, I thought that cation exchange capacity and salinity would be correlated. When I actually go to the literature, I found that many other people also found that they weren't correlated and that places with the highest cation exchange capacity had the lowest electrical conductivity. So although I was surprised, other people have also found it, and that's where you do the citing of the references. And then another nice section, which I always found very satisfying. Once you've discussed your work and you've interpreted it and you've come to a nice, clear conclusion about whether you've made a great breakthrough in terms of how savannas work, then you can have a little paragraph where you say, well, I might have found totally different results from what the rest of the literature has found, but it could be that my fellow students were not very good at collecting data. I happen to know that some of them used very like fuzzy pictures when they were trying to identify their trees. So perhaps they thought they had 3 species of acacias at their site, but maybe there was only 1. So maybe there are some sources of error in my results. So you can, this is a nice, because I think everyone when they're analyzing their data is a bit aware that it might not be perfect data. And this is your chance to just express that and be honest. But don't be too negative, because, you know, you guys have put a lot of work into your report. So let's not totally undermine everything that you've done. So make a little couple of sentences saying, these are the potential sources of error, and then move on. And then you don't have to, but if you've got some cool ideas about a way that you could have collected the data better. Someone sent me their report a few days ago where they said, well, I could have answered this question a lot better if we'd collected the herbivore data, if we'd really done a better job of noticing where the herbivores were in the landscape. This is where you can say, I think a really good thing to do would be to put up some camera traps and actually observe for several weeks where the herbivores were in the landscape. So that's an optional thing. And then it's really nice at the end just to finish off saying, oh, after all of this long, complicated discussion, my main thing that I found is that soils really have a big impact on how savanna ecosystems function. Kazam. And for your conclusion, if you're stuck about how to conclude, go back to your problem statement and link back to your problem statement. So a scientific report is really, it's like little weaving. It's like you're weaving a report together. Everything needs to talk to each other. The results talk to the objectives, the discussion talks to the results and the introduction, and the conclusion talks to the problem statement, and everything gets sewn up nicely into a beautiful final report. Any questions about the discussion? Do we need additional references for our discussion, or can you use the ones we used in the introduction? If you feel no need to add more references from your introduction, you won't be marked down. But just go have a look at your introduction and make sure that you've got enough to cover what you need. So we're not going to like say you get 2 extra marks for adding references in the discussion. That's not true. But if you add some references in the discussion that weren't used in the introduction, that's also fine. Layla's question, the abstract is put at the end of the report. No, the abstract goes at the beginning. You just write it at the end. So it's in time, you always do the abstract at the end when you've finished thinking about everything, but the abstract goes at the very beginning of the report. So if we go back to this example, the abstract is on page 2. So that's where your abstract has to be. Do we need a long paragraph for results, or are the little paragraphs okay? Little paragraphs are fine. You just need a bit of text that explains your results. Okay, I think that's all the questions. Any more questions around the discussion? Bob has sent a link. I'm sure that's going to be very exciting. Can someone follow that link? Should we follow it right now? How you should read coronavirus studies or any science paper. Ah, this looks very interesting. So this is have a look at this link that Bob sent. It looks like someone's talking a little bit about what I was saying about how to make a scientific report a beautiful piece of writing, as well as being a useful piece of science.
So this is Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Stepping in. I'm hearing a great echo here, so someone must have a mic on. I was really struck by this. It was recently in the New York Times. It's by a science journalist who reads lots and lots of papers, and he's explaining to ordinary people why it is that science papers seem so weird, but they have their own kind of literary style. They have a narrative arc, and understanding that helps you to understand, you know, how to put your story together. So I found this really quite helpful, even though I've been writing science papers all my entire life.
Sorry, I was talking to myself. Thank you, Bob. That looks like a lovely read. And it'll help you to know what's expected. And when you guys know what is expected, then you'll have a whole lot more fun writing up this report. So the final thing I just want to talk you through is what's expected from the abstract. Key thing to an abstract is it has to be short. Usually when you're trying to submit a paper to a scientific journal, they give you 300 words, maybe maximum 500 words. But you have to summarize the entire study. You have to say, why is this important? You have to have a problem statement. You have to have an aim, you have to have a method, and you have to have a result, all in 300 words. It sounds impossible, but I think you guys will find it a lot easier than you think at this stage. So have a look at abstracts of other papers to see how clearly they do it. When it comes to methods, you have to be over. You have to say, we assessed the changes in woody and herbaceous biomass and species composition down a Katina at a savanna site in Southern Africa. That would be a one-sentence summary of your methods. And then you need a one-sentence summary of why you're doing what you're doing and a couple of sentences on the results. You do have to summarize your key results, and that would be your abstract. So, just to talk you through. Yes, Bob?
You know, many people write their abstracts as a kind of an afterthought and, you know, don't put very much effort into it. I'm going to argue to you that after your title, the abstract is the most important part of your paper. And the reason for this is that every year, hundreds and thousands of papers are published, and almost none of them are read. Most people at the most just look at your title, and sometimes they'll go on and look at your abstract. So your abstract really has to grab them. So not only does it have to have those things that Sally explained to you, those components, but it actually also must make you want to go and read the full paper. Think of it as the blurb inside, you know, on a book cover at the airport. You've browsed past. You've seen this brightly colored book with an interesting sounding title. You've lifted it off the shelf, and then you read the blurb on the back, and you decide on the basis of that whether you're going to pay $300 to buy the book or not. Or like, you know, going before in the old days when you went to movies, they had these things called trailers, which told you about upcoming movies, and whether you would go and see that depended on how exciting the little trailer was. So think of your abstract as the trailer, the thing that gets people to read further.
Great. Yeah, and I think if you guys are very honest, you've done some reading for your introduction. Think honestly, when you were doing your literature search, how many of those papers did you read past the introduction, past the abstract of? And that will help you to see the importance of your abstract. There's a question. When we were doing the hypothesis section, we were required to produce at least 3 graphs. Do those graphs go in the results section? Yes, we need to have some graphs or some tables. So as I mentioned in Prac 3, Prac 13, what do you need in your results? What you need in your results is, you can either have text, you can say verbally, you can say, I found 20 tons per hectare of carbon at the top of the slope, and I found 12 tons per hectare at the bottom of the slope, and the standard deviation was 3. Or you can present it as a figure, or you can present it as a table. But you need to have like a couple of results that are presented in your report. Does that answer your question? Yes, the abstract is trying to advertise the report. You're trying to get everyone excited. Cool. There's some discussion in the chat section about the abstract if people want to go have a look at that. And then I mentioned that we need to have acknowledgement section and references. So this is just highlighting and trying to make it exciting for you. But if you want to know exactly what needs to be in the report, go back to that document. Are there any more questions before I just talk to you about how we're going to access the practical reports so that you can be clear about what's expected? You think it's hard to sell soils, Tatenda? I don't know, go back to Bob's soils lectures. I think he's done a pretty good job. So just to make it clear to you and to the TAs and to us, this is what we're expecting. This is the breakdown. The final practical report will be out of 100. And you will be given 15 marks for your title, abstract, and introduction. And the TAs will be answering these questions. When they read it, they'll be answering these questions. And if the answer to those questions is not yes, then they will be marking you down. Aims and objectives, 5. So this is your chance to improve. If you got like 30% for your aims and objectives in Prac 11, then now you can try get 5 out of 5 for your aims and objectives. Materials and methods, you should get feedback from your TAs by the end of the week around the materials and methods and what you did right and what you did wrong. The results section is a large amount because you have to have the tables and the results. You have to report them. They have to be linked to the aims. They have to be presented correctly, axes labeled, units, figure caption, and then the results have to be explained in a clear language. So those are the 3 things that are expected. And then the discussion, we're going to be asking those same questions that your friend's going to ask you when you have a little chat about it. Is there discussion about the findings? Have they been linked back to what you were expecting? And do you try to explain what the results mean with reference to the literature? And then, as I mentioned, look at that, 10% of your mark is for good references. So it's fiddly work making sure your references are correct, but it's easy ways to get good marks. And I don't say this here, but you're not going to get 10 out of 10 if you only reference 2 papers. You have to have shown that you've done a bit of reading around this subject. Presentation is all just around making sure that you've got a good writing style, that you don't have any typos. That's also an easy way to pick up marks. And then there's 5 marks here just for if you sit back and say, my goodness, did this person really sell me their topic? Like, have they done a really good job of presenting this report? So that's an extra 5 marks for just the overall impression. Any questions around how we're going to be assessing you? Great. Is everyone feeling happy and confident? Do we get marked down if our text references don't have a pointer? Can you explain what you mean, Kamoratile? Bob knows what you mean. In your text, when you're talking about your reference in the text, you have to use brackets and you have to say, you have to reference the person's surname and the date that they published it, and then it has to link to the reference at the bottom.
No, what I understand by the question is if there are references in the reference list where there is no call out to them from the text, would you get marked down for that? Yes, you would. And the opposite is also true. If you put a call out in the text, but there isn't somewhere in the reference list for it to go to, that is also problematic. So every time you do a reference in the text, there must be a reference to back it up, and all your references in your reference list must be called out at least once in the text.
Okay, good. Yeah, so they have to link up perfectly. And then I don't know what Wits recommends. I haven't actually looked it up, but they tell you in this document, I think it's Harvard. They want you to use Harvard style of referencing. You're going to have to go and have a look at what they tell you. References. I can't see. Just follow this format exactly and you will get good marks. From what I can see, it looks like the Harvard style of referencing. It is Harvard, great. Exactly, you need to be consistent, don't mix styles, and then we don't, like, you know, Science and Nature and those journals use numbers, so they reference with numbers in the text. We want you to reference the authors so that we can link it up nicely to your reference list. Great, any more questions? Are you all feeling enthused about this fun task that we've set for you? With any luck for some of you, it's going to be the first of many, many, many wonderful and exciting scientific reports that you write in your lives. Okay, so if there are no more questions, or if no one else wants to comment verbally, then let me just summarize where we're at from here. We're going to have another, so what I've suggested to your TAs, and they're quite keen that they think this will work, is that you guys go away and spend the next 2 or 3 days having your little pair and share with your friend, where you plan your discussion. And then the TAs are going to organize one final TUT session, probably on Monday, that was my suggestion, where you can come with them with questions, like any questions that you have. And ideally that TUT session will be when they've already given you the feedback on your Prac 12. So you can ask them, I thought I did this most amazing introduction and methods and materials. Why did I get 50%? And they can explain to you. So that's going to be an online little TUT session with just the 10 or 12 of you in each, where you can ask more questions around exactly where you went wrong and what you can do right for this Prac report. So that's your TAs are going to set that up, and they're going to try to get your Prac 12 marked by Monday so that you will have your results back when you have that TUT. And then you guys have like about 10 days, I think, to submit your final report, which will be on the, it's not going to be 10 days, I lie. It's going to be like 10 days from now to submit your final report. We want to get it out the way so that you guys can focus on all your other work. But I think it's pretty much done. You really just have to write this discussion, and you can do that with the help of your friends and your TAs in the next few days. Then you can just nail this. It's June 12th for the final report. That's a Friday, I think, so next week Friday. I'm going to leave it up to the TAs because it's much easier for the TAs to suit you guys. So they will schedule it for you, but so you must just engage with them if you guys have constraints about what time the TUT will be. Any more questions about how this is going to go forwards? We're going to have like just a general feedback session on Friday. Bob and I will both attend, and we'll talk through the exam, which is and what's expected for the exam. Except we're not calling it an exam, it's just an assessment, and it's going to be in terms of an essay. I didn't want to talk about that today because I think it's best to focus. The rubric says we should have only one objective. No, that's not true. Did I say that? Let's have a look. Well, sorry, one overall aim. Thanks for pointing that out. Some smaller objectives. I'll correct that and put it on the e-learning site. Thanks, Kira. Thank you to the TAs for the nice feedback. That's very good. Yeah, I can see the TAs put a lot of effort into the feedback. So I hope you guys are going to learn from that for the final report. Great. Any more questions? Okay, so you guys will get another chance to ask me and Bob questions on Friday morning at 9 o'clock. I'm going to disseminate this for those of you who didn't manage to attend. You can listen. And yeah, we'll sign off for the day, and good luck with finalizing this and getting a nice discussion sorted. The key to doing well in this is just to put the effort in to do a little bit of a literature search and a little bit of reading of the primary literature. And then you'll find it much easier to write the report. Great. Okay, I'm going to stop recording, guys, and good luck.